Death Battle 2024 has wrapped up, and I'm feeling like a bit of reflection is in order. Now, instead of just listing each episode and talking about what I liked and disliked, I'm gonna let people take a peek into how I rate these videos by breaking down the 5 categories that make a Death Battle episode, well, a Death Battle episode. Now, I do have reviews on my channel for each of these 4 matchups, so I won't go into too much detail in each category, just my justifications on their placement in my rankings. But without further ado, let's start with my first category, my personal bias. Now, this isn't a category that affects how I grade an episode, but like everyone, there are characters and matchups I like more than others. So I thought it'd be fun to talk about how I'd rate the concepts of these episodes and my history with the characters. Let's start with my obvious choice. Number 4, Among Us vs Fall Guys. Now, I had never played Among Us or Fall Guys before this episode was released, and it's not something I'll go back to later on either. Among Us vs Fall Guys is a prime example of an episode that came out far too late and already had interest in said matchup waning. That being said, the episode came out and it was really good. It just goes to show you that when Death Battle brings the quality, it creates general interest, other than the matchup needing to have that beforehand. Number 3, Omni-Man vs Bardock. I truthfully think that of the 3 big Omni-Man matchups that exist, versus Bardock, Homelander, and Pink Diamond, that this is the one I'm least invested in. Homelander's matchup had the advantage of having Omni-Man absolutely embarrass that whiny bitch. Pink Diamond really leads into the concept of having a powerful leader turn against their own people to save those they thought were smaller than them originally. And Bardock's only main connection has them both being alien races that conquer planets. Sure, the concept makes sense and they can still make a great episode from it, but a Pink Diamond matchup would have been more interesting for me. That and Dragon Ball just had a matchup 2 episodes ago, so it felt like that series got brought back way too soon. Like I said in my review though, it makes sense when you think about the Kickstarter and them needing views. But for me, this is one of the weakest Dragon Ball matchups I've seen circle around the community. Now do Team Rocket versus the Pilaf gang, you cowards. Number 2, Joker vs Giorno. Now, in terms of wanting this for the matchup, hell no I didn't. The controversy around Golden Experience Requiem and if Joker could get past it is something I didn't want to deal with in this community. As for the characters though, these are probably my favorite characters this whole season. JoJo's Part 5 is my favorite JoJo's part, and Persona 5 is... well, it's not my favorite Persona game. I really liked Persona 4 Golden, I'm currently playing through Persona 3 Portable, and I spent a lot of money on owning a physical copy of Persona 1. And with Persona 5, I started it, but I didn't finish it. I'll get back to it eventually, I just didn't like the way they formatted their story very much. But using Joker or any wildcard character in Persona is very appealing in a death battle setting. There's just so much you can do with how many personas each wildcard can use. Not to mention with Persona 5 specifically, they can really lean into how stylistic the game is and create some amazing settings and scenarios. So in terms of the debate, I don't like this matchup, but the characters and potential for animation is what really got me excited for this one. And finally, number 1, no shit, it's Bowser vs Eggman. Of course this has to be my number 1. Both Mario and Sonic make up my earliest childhood memories, and this is the last Mario vs Sonic matchup that hasn't been done yet. Plus, Moro is such a boss that they made this a full army fight, meaning that there were so many ways this battle could have gone. Normally, researching this would be a nightmare for some people, but I love finding new things about these characters and debating my opinions. So this waiting period was one that I really enjoyed, even though this was the 3rd episode I predicted wrong this year. Those are how I'd rank how excited I was for these episodes coming out. But let's talk about an aspect of these episodes that actually affect my ranking. Let's rate all of the analyses we've had this season, starting with Giorno, my favorite character, my least favorite analysis. Giorno's analysis is actually really disappointing. Each analysis I'm going to be talking about has top tier editing, but Giorno's analysis is probably the least visually appealing all year. On top of that, they don't cover Giorno's relationships with his teammates at all. Some people who weren't already familiar with his character started thinking he was a loner, which couldn't be farther from the truth. Now they did cover Giorno's abilities quite well, and I give them props for that since they can be quite complicated. But they didn't cover how Giorno couldn't use his creation ability when it's too cold, which led to a confusing bit in the animation. Not everything in this analysis was bad, of course. No analysis fully is. But this was by far the weakest one this season. Number 7, the Fall Guys. The Fall Guys analysis is pretty good for what it covers. It covers all the quirky and weird aspects of the Fall Guys, shows that terrifying skeleton, and covers their crossovers in a way which leads into the animation nicely. My one reason for not liking this analysis as much as the others on this list is that it just isn't as interesting as the others in my opinion, and it doesn't cover the Fall Guys story at all. I was actually pretty excited to see how they would handle the lore of the Fall Guys, and they just didn't. Now, I do understand that there is a lot to cover, and what they did cover was really good and fun. I just think that this analysis could have been a little bit more than it was. Number 6. Joker. Joker's analysis was pretty good, but suffers to a lesser extent the same way Giorno's does. Joker and his abilities get covered really well, but most of his friends and social links are not talked about. In fact, almost none of Joker's story was covered other than the stuff that could give him scaling. An important fact in this debate was to give Joker a way around Golden Experience Requiem. And they explained that by saying Joker has an unshakable will and how he can resist the effects of the Omnipotent Orb. And with that, I think they did pretty well. As someone who originally thought Giorno would win, this analysis definitely shook my resolve, which definitely isn't an easy thing to do. I just wish there was more story represented. Number 5, Omni-Man. The biggest problem with Omni-Man's analysis is that they seem to be just so scared of spoilers, that they don't cover larger feats and end his analysis where the show ends season 2 of Invincible. Other than that, the writing and editing is exquisite. The fast-paced editing and coverage of Omni-Man's story is just fantastic. Some people may not like how quick things go, but I loved it. The fact that I still rank 4 analyses higher than this one, and the only flaw this one has is that they refuse to spoil anything, really shows the quality of the writing we've been getting this year, and what we should expect moving forward with the show. Number 4, Among Us. This analysis is excellent. As someone who gives little to no shit about Among Us as a game, this does a lot to make me understand the appeal of the series and the kookiness of these characters. It is actually a perfect example of how you set up a fight as well, with many moments in the analysis directly paid off in this fight. The main thing I liked about this, to put it above the rest of the analyses, is the cute moment where Dummy, Ringmaster, and Jocelyn are all playing Among Us together with Wiz and Boomstick. It's so small, but I love hearing their voices and seeing them and just having fun together. That's the best way to describe this analysis. Fun. It seems they had a lot of fun with researching and voicing these parts and even the animation later on. I'm glad they can continue this fun independently. Number 3, Bardock. Whereas the last analysis was fun, this one was interesting, informative, and covered Dragon Ball better than any other analysis in Death Battle's history. Bardock has a loose relation to Dragon Ball's main story, so his story and feats feel really fresh. On top of how they cover Bardock's feats, I really love how they cover his story and their justification for Super Saiyan. They make him seem like a very compassionate person, someone who took the same exact steps Goku did to achieve his own Super Saiyan. Now, there is the problem of having to composite and scale Bardock's feats, but that isn't Death Battle's fault at all. There's just no way to cover Bardock without speculation since he doesn't do much. I'm just glad they didn't give him Super Saiyan 3 from Heroes because that would have been too composited for me. This analysis is lovely and a great way to start our Death Battle 2024 journey. Well, next to Omni-Man's analysis, which I also really liked. Number 2 and number 1, Bowser and Eggman. These two analyses are perfect to me. Their editing, storytelling, interesting feats, and overall personality are such a sight to behold for an internet show. It's just way too good. Showing the juxtaposition between Bowser viewing his army as a sort of found family, to Eggman not really caring about his minions until Sage, a being who he started viewing as a dog. I know they say nah when talking about Eggman changing, but when they say that Eggman's story is evolving in the opposite way of his grandfather, how Sage might be changing him for the better, that's such an interesting and emotional way to take Sage's relationship with Eggman. With two analyses that are perfect, which one could I choose as better? I'll just let Bias talk and say Eggman. I just like him more as a character, but Bowser is such a close second place. Moving on from the analyses, let's talk about the fights. How would I rank each battle? Starting with number 4, Bardock vs. Omni-Man. With a fight as amazing as Bardock vs. Omni-Man being at the lowest spot, you know we had a good year for fight animations. Devil Artemis did a fantastic job with this fight, incorporating so much from the storyboards and finally giving us our first ever Great Ape on Death Battle. Or Uzuru for you purists. Bardock's Super Saiyan transformation is just fantastic as well, giving the most beautiful and most powerful Super Saiyan we've ever seen on the show. Omni-Man was no slouch either, with them showing off how powerful he is by only needing one good hit to take out Bardock no matter what form he's in. Now, the main issue that I have with this fight that placed it in last place is that it seems like it was withheld by certain limitations in this episode. The Omni-Man model doesn't look like it was designed with battle damage in mind, meaning that it almost looked like Omni-Man didn't take any damage throughout the entire fight. Omni-Man's model also lacks good facial expressions and just looks off in a lot of scenes. Bardock definitely was the best part of the animation by far, even if his own facial designs didn't look as good as Goku vs. Superman's. Plus, there's just so much from the storyboards that got cut that I just absolutely would have loved to see. Even with saying everything though, Devil Artemis did a fantastic job on this fight and I can't wait to see what he cooks up next year. Number 3, Joker vs. Giorno. This might be surprising because in my review, I call this fight a perfect blend of JoJo and Persona styles, and I still agree with that. This fight shows off pretty much all of Giorno's abilities and gives Joker 4 of his most iconic personas. We get moments like how Alice uses Die For Me, which is an instant kill move from Persona, and Giorno creates vines to raise him up into the air to avoid the blasts, which makes sense in JoJo's world but not as much Persona's. This also happens again where Joker says he needs to nullify Giorno's creation ability and summons Jack Frost to use Ice Age, which isn't a move used for nullification, but since Giorno can't create life in extreme cold, it makes sense in JoJo's world. Seeing Golden experience Requiem was amazing, but I don't think they ever actually used Return to Zero. We didn't see any attacks get reverted, but at least we got to see the death loop. My only other problem is that when Golden experience Requiem is punching Joker, for some reason certain frames freeze and it's really jarring. Other than that, this fight is absolutely amazing and represents both series perfectly. Number 2, Among Us vs Fall Guys. Literally exactly the same reasoning as what I just said, but it feels more fun, has more personality, and has a ton of references to the community all over the fight. The only scenes I don't like is in the very beginning of the obstacle course. We get this weird flat scene, and right after that we get pictures of characters getting eliminated. Other than that, I have no issues. There are so many hand-drawn scenes and they all look fantastic, especially once they enter space. I mean, you see this on screen right now, right? It's great. It definitely feels way higher scale than I think most people thought it would be, but for us in the Versus community, we knew what was up. The last thing I'll mention before moving on is this detail that I love so much. The dark blue crewmate and the yellow imposter are just the bestest of friends. And finally, number 1, again, no surprise, Bowser vs Eggman. This is the best fight Death Battle has ever done. Moro absolutely killed it here. Both Bowser and Eggman are characterized perfectly. There's just so much going on in the background that it didn't even need to be there, but it is and I love it. The Sonic characters feel as powerful as they need to feel, and Bowser's crew feels as unpredictable as they needed to be. I can't think of a single bad thing about the fight animation itself. It just works in every way. Sure, Infinite died in a silly way, but it was just so funny that I still really liked it. King Boo wasn't actually taken down, but the way Metal Sonic embarrassed him just made me smile. Bowser getting fooled by Eggman and Eggman getting annoyed that Bowser fell for such an obvious dupe is just so in character. Eggman refusing to go down easy and still trying different tricks to stop himself from dying shows how tenacious Eggman really is. This was the fight that made everyone see Death Battle in a greater light. I think this was the episode they needed to push themselves into 2025, because now, so many more eyes are on them. Agree or disagree with the verdict, Bowser vs Eggman is an episode you just can't ignore. And the fight animation is the prime reason why that was the case. Moving on from the fights though, we have the music, which is going to be a pretty quick segment because there's not much to say about the music. I am not a music major, so this is all subjective on my end. Let's start with number 4, Solid State Invincible. This is a good enough song with a really bad name. The only reason I like this song the least is because it sounds just like a higher tempo diabolical Invincible Me. The style of music isn't my favorite, and even though it has pieces of Solid State Scouter, it was definitely way more Omni-Man coded than Bardock. Now, that doesn't necessarily affect how much I like the song, but it is very noticeable since the song as well as its predecessor are based on Tom Tom by Holy Fuck, which is a song that plays in the Invincible show and sounds so similar to these. I do like this song and I still listen to it on my own time, but I just like it the least of what we got. Number 3, Sussy Bean. God fucking damn it. So this song suffers from the same issues I just talked about, where it feels way more like a Fall Guys song than an Among Us song. But throughout this track, Among Us music motifs are used multiple times, and the ambience Among Us is known for is perfectly blended with the Fall Guys sounding music. So even when leitmotifs aren't being used, it still constantly feels like a crossover song. Theirwolf has always been better than Brandon at making music that sounds like a song directly taken from its source material, and that is something I've always loved about his style, even if Brandon's rock style is still very iconic. Number 2, Requiem for a Thief. This song is amazing. It blends Last Surprise from Persona 5 and Il Vento d'Oro, which is Giorno's theme from JoJo's, absolutely perfectly. It definitely is more Persona inspired, but the JoJo song is used for this song's bass tempo, so you can feel JoJo's inspiration throughout this whole song. The lyrics also represent both characters very well, with my favorite line being, "I'll steal your heart of gold," which is just such a cool line. Requiem for a Thief would normally be my favorite song in any season it shows up in, but alas, Brandon had to blow things out of the park yet again with Game Over. This song is amazing. At first listen, it sounds way more Sonic inspired than Mario, but listen closer and you can hear multiple Fury Bowser themes from 3D World, in the final from Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story, in the airship theme from Super Mario Bros. 3. For Sonic's side, We have Eggman from SA2, Infinite's theme and the final boss theme from Sonic Forces, and Dr. Eggman's Showdown from Sonic Lost World. This song is fantastic, and the lyrics go way too hard for a matchup like this, representing how both will use different means to, in their own words, kill for the crown. Game Over was the first Death Battle song to hit trending, and there's no surprise as to why it did. Outside of Death Battle, this is a song that I think any rock fan would love to listen to, and another reason that this episode has been so loved even by the Death Battle haters, which says more than any praise I can give this episode. Finally, let's look at the conclusions of these episodes to conclude my video, starting with my least favorite conclusion, which is obviously number 4, Omni-Man vs. Bardock. This one by far is the most confusing in its conclusion. For one, they lacked a lot of context for a few feats. They somehow didn't factor in effort when calculating their potential power. For Omni-Man, the number they used for his power is from a Sun Disk feat, which I feel could make sense if they discussed it in the episode and not left it to a black box in the top right corner. So this beam can destroy the Sun Disk, and in that black box it states that the ship that shoots the beam can resist its own firepower, and since it was destroyed by a Viltrumite, then the Viltrumite should be stronger than that beam. That I'm fine with, but they scaled Bardock to King Vegeta's feat of blowing up these planets. But this feat can't be used for accurate scaling in the slightest. King Vegeta destroyed these planets while exerting almost no energy, so we can't possibly fathom the cap on his power here. On top of everything, the speed difference is just way too large. I get that speed wasn't the only thing used to calculate their conclusion, but when one character at base power is trillions of times faster than the other, then I have no idea on how Omni-Man would even be able to touch Bardock. Some people say that they just made Omni-Man win for the controversy and views, but I don't believe this. I think they legitimately think Omni-Man wins this fight. Maybe they just got stuck thinking they needed a certain character to win a majority of the categories that they started doing every episode this year, but this episode definitely needed a more clear explanation than what we got. Number 3, Among Us vs. Fall Guys. Look, a matchup like this with such crazy characters that have been part of multiple universes is one that was never going to have a natural conclusion. But we really needed more information than what was represented. There was a distinct lack of comparative feats. They give the Among Us crew a faster than light feat, but don't talk about the Fall Guys stretching feat until later in the conclusion. They list the Imposter's Vampire Survivor feat without comparing the Fall Guys' best strength feat. They list the Fall Guys surviving the Big Bang feat without listing the Among Us crew's durability, etc. Not to mention, when they start talking about the Bizarre category, they really don't bring up much. It goes by so quickly. If they extended this conclusion by even a minute to add some comparison feats, I think I'd like this conclusion a lot more. But although I say all of that, I think their arguments make sense and Fall Guys do win. But just give me a bit more, man. My appetite isn't satiated yet. Now, one conclusion that goes over way more information is my next entry, which is number 2, Bowser vs. Eggman. Not putting this at number 1 is going to be my most controversial entry in my entire list, because this conclusion is great. Agree or disagree, they go over so much information, and even add these alternate scenarios courtesy of Moro. These are insane and are such a treat as a fan of Death Battle. Almost everything in the conclusion is excellent. So why is it only in second place? Well, there are 2 things that hold this back for me. Number 1 is the category on intelligence, because it doesn't matter. All they really say is Eggman makes better tech and doesn't get outsmarted often, which doesn't matter in a fight like this. When it comes to battle strategy, both have really good arguments on why they should win this category, but they are just not explored at all. Bowser may be a doofus, but him and his army have shown some great battle strategy from time to time. Maybe they really wanted Eggman to win a single category this episode, but they should have brought up Eggman quickly coming up with a plan to kill Solaris, or Sage creating the plan to kill the End. All I'm saying is that there's better arguments for both of them to take this category. My only other issue is that they say Sage came up with millions of battle strategies but couldn't come up with a way to defeat the Titans, which is not true on so many levels. When she brought up the millions of calculations, it was about getting Eggman out of cyberspace safely and not to kill the Titans. Not to mention, when the Titans were mentioned, she wasn't allowed to use Sonic in any of her calculations. I have a few other problems with this conclusion, like talking about the size of either person's army when one side has a number and the other side doesn't, and even if Bowser has every Mario power-up, he probably wouldn't use them to their full potential or give them to every unit since he has never fought like that before. But those 2 things seem to only bother me, so I don't think I can let it affect my viewpoint too much. But I really want to stress that this is a great conclusion with only a few hiccups. They cover so much but only drop the ball on a few things for me. But now let's talk about my favorite conclusion, which, as you probably can guess, is number 1, Joker versus Giorno. I was so certain that Giorno and GER would win this, but Death Battle convinced me that I was wrong about that. We all knew that Joker stat stomped Giorno so hard, so we all knew that Joker would normally take every category, until you factor in GER. Golden Experience Requiem makes speed and resistances a moot point, meaning that the only question they needed to answer was if Joker could get past the return to zero, which through comparing Almighty Magic affecting the Omnipotent Orb to GER's abilities made total sense to me. You can't reality warp something that denies other reality warping effects. Plus, they explained that Joker being able to have an unshakable will, and restore his will with his social links, that the will-breaking aspect of Golden Experience Requiem wouldn't affect him at all. This does mean that this was the biggest stomp this season, and some people are probably going to be really upset by that, but this was everything I want in a good conclusion. Now, some people might think I'm being hypocritical since I wanted more comparable feats in Among Us vs Fall Guys, but in this episode I'm fine with it because it wasn't the question that needed an answer. Joker beating GER was what needed to be explained, and they went into depth on why that is. With all that being said, here's my episode ranking for the year. 4. Omni-Man vs Bardock, B-. 3. Among Us vs Fall Guys, B. 2. Joker vs Giorno, B+. And 1. Bowser vs Eggman, A+. My final rating for this season is a B+. Every episode was good, and we have another contender for the best episode of all time in this set of episodes. Every time we get a fantastic episode, people always say that Death Battle peaked. In Season 8, Saitama vs Popeye came out and people said it couldn't get better than that. In Season 9, none beat that one, but then in Season 10 we had Bill vs Discord, Scooby vs Courage, and Goku vs Superman 3. All 3 of these were contenders for the best episode of all time. And now we have Bowser vs Dr. Eggman. And yet again, people are saying that Death Battle has peaked and the show can't get any better. For a show like Death Battle, their creativity and passion is their peak. As long as they have that, we are going to keep improving year after year. And I can't wait for what the future holds. Speaking of future, let's talk about next year. As we move past 2024, we are now going into a brand new year of Death Battle. If I had to predict anything, I think we'll get 5 3D episodes, 5 sprite episodes, 1 episode animated by Moro, and 1 episode hand-drawn by Luis. All I know is that I am so excited for this new independent venture. I trust Death Battle to cover any matchup well, seeing as Season 10 and this year have shown an absolute love and respect for the characters they cover. And even though they have room to improve, I know that they can keep improving and make their show the best show on the internet. I'll continue to make videos next year to cover the things I want to talk about for Death Battle, which is a lot, trust me. Death Battle has now bounced back from the death of 2 companies, and I can't wait to see how they treat their new independents. Take care everyone, and let's see this bright new future for Death Battle together.